Every hero has 15 signature cards. One of them has to be the worst. I'm here with Boomguy, and we're going to try and figure out which one that worst card is, and that'll be the first half of the video where we each pick a card and hopefully agree on which one it will be. And then the second half, we're going to try and rank those, but the twist is that we're going to try and put a positive spin on these cards. Why would you use them? Where would you use them? What are their redeeming qualities? And we're now looking at the first wave, also known as Cycle 1. So Boomguy, how are you doing, and where can people find you?
I'm very excited. For the next 30 to 40 minutes, they can find me right here on this video, Villain Theory. But normally, I run a podcast called Winning Hand, which is a podcast all about Marvel Champions, where we talk around one card at a time is kind of the hook. So we center each episode around a single card, but we talk about all kinds of stuff Marvel Champions.
Awesome, and you'll be able to find links to that down below, and it is worth checking out. Really good stuff.
Thank you, thank you. We have fun doing it. So and I'm excited to be here. The first episode was a lot of fun. I'm excited to see this tier list grow and see how we talk about some of these cards.
Yeah, I think we should just get into it. And last time I picked the first hero, so this time you're up. Which hero would you like to talk about first?
Ooh, that is a tough choice. This wave has one of my favorite heroes in the entire game. So I'm going to start there. It's Captain America.
Nice. I think a lot of
I
people
love
will
Cap.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Cap. He's one of my favorite heroes. He has been since he came out. I still play him regularly. But there's one of his cards that I'm going to have to say I don't play that often. What I think his worst card is Shield Toss.
Ooh, interesting. So I'm going to completely contradict that straight away. I'm actually going for a different one, and I'm going to go for. I almost went over Captain America's shield there, which is not my choice. Captain America's helmet. I think this card is kind of niche because, well, I should probably let you talk about yours first, but interesting how we differ there. So I've gone for an upgrade, and you've gone for the shield toss event.
Yeah, so we disagree. I will try to convince you why it's Shield Toss, and then you can try to convince me why it's the helmet.
Okay.
So the negatives about this, it forces Captain America's shield back to your hand. That's the first big drawback. So Captain America's shield is not a free upgrade. So I do have to pay to play it down again. So that's an added cost of this card.
Yep.
And Captain America's shield can't be tutored or found in any way. It's a setup ability. So if for whatever reason it goes in your hand, you don't play it out right away, and you have to discard a card, it can get lost, which is very detrimental to what Cap wants to do because that means he can't play shield block or some other cards. It does decent damage, but you have to discard cards to do it, and sometimes just discarding cards to make this work doesn't feel great. And 4 damage, it's not on the efficiency curve, I don't think necessarily. Like for the cards you're spending, you could spend quite a few cards. I for me, this is a miss. I don't think it's a terrible card, but I do think it's the worst one in this kit.
Yeah, I feel like maybe it's his second worst, but I'm interested to put them sort of head to head. Yeah, shield toss for me, I think the more enemies you can hit with it, the more efficient it gets, and that makes it quite situational. Because if you're only hitting one enemy with it, then yeah, that added cost of having to replay your shield is kind of a problem. And it has the superpower trait, but since it doesn't cost anything, you know, he doesn't ever run death focus really, making it, you know, it is quite costly. So very situational card where most of his are very sort of general. I'm going to talk a little bit about the helmet because see, it's interesting having a card which can, you know, stop you from being defeated, and it's only one cost. So it's kind of a get out of jail free option, kind of. It's, you know, it can just kind of block an attack in some way, but it leaves you very, very vulnerable with just 1 hit point on your dial. So if, let's say, the villain's attack hits you there, the encounter card could then just take you out straight away. A lot of the more modern sort of save me cards, as I'm going to call them here, they kind of give you more hit points to play with, or they have some extra benefit, like readying you up or something. This one is cheap, but I don't typically ever play this because Captain America doesn't really get defeated. You know, obviously there are situations, but he's full of stuns. He has, you know, free defense with that shield. He has shield block. He has, I think, healing on his alter ego support. I just feel like I never ever need to play this. I think if I'm in a desperate situation, I'd rather put that resource into trying to save the game than just preemptively think I might go down to 1 hit point and, you know, need to survive that. So that's kind of my angle. But I'm interested to discuss this because I think there'll be, points for both of these. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think what you said is good. I'm interested to hear what people say in the comments. So leave a comment which one you think we should go for here. I think I play the helmet more than I play the shield toss. Shield toss has to hit at least two enemies. Otherwise, it's not worth it because I could just do my basic attack for two, toss shield toss to ready myself, and then attack again for two. So by just discarding shield toss, I can deal 4 damage. So it has to do more than that for it to be worth it because now I have to play my shield again. Otherwise, my shield block is completely useless.
Yeah.
I think for me, the helmet has its limitations, right? It is a one cost upgrade. It's very situational. It's not often you're going to get defeated. But for a hero who blocks a lot or defends a lot, I think it can help, especially against the higher damage output villains. If you're playing, I don't know, anyone who hits for a lot, right? We can go through Ronin or Thanos or whoever. You can take multiple big attacks and you can only defend so many times. Shield block is probably the second best defensive card in the entire game, but it does require your shield to exhaust, which means you can't play two shield blocks in a round. So there are times where I've played it. If nothing else, it thins your deck. It gets you to other cards faster.
Yep.
But it is just one of those where when I'm down to 4 health, 3 health, and I'm playing someone who has a lot of attack, I don't have to flip down preemptively to recover. I can always say like, well, I really need to be doing something else, a main scheme or thwarting or hitting a minion. Because if I die, it's okay. You have a little bit of a backstop, which is great.
Yeah. I don't disagree with anything you said really here. It's interesting that I think I play shield toss a lot more than the helmet, so it might just come down to personal opinion on this one. I do think, if there's two, maybe even three enemies, I can play that shield toss and I can get pretty good effectiveness. When I start to hit 3 or 4 enemies, this starts to become like a really efficient card. So it does have those uses. I guess I'm talking about the positive already, but there's positive in both of these because as long as you don't go on to lose because you're at 1 hit point from something else, just being able to take an attack and not die, the helmet can kind of be a tough card.
Yeah, I think, well, shield toss is awkward because 4 damage is sometimes too much for smaller minions, and then it feels bad because you're losing damage, and it's not enough for the really big minions, and then you're not killing anything, which makes it feel bad too. So for me, when I do play shield toss, is a lot of things to line up, right? I want to have multiple minions. I want them to have exactly 4 hit points or maybe three, because hitting a 2 hit point minion just doesn't feel very good with this, and hitting an 8 point minion feels kind of like a waste. So I think I end up playing the helmet more, but the helmet was probably my second choice because he has so many good cards in his kit. If you feel really strongly about the helmet, I would relent and give you this one.
See, I don't feel really strongly, so I was about to say the same to you. You know what? Let's go with Shield Toss. I think in the previous episode, we went with Webbed Up when we were a little bit, struggling to decide on that one. So, you know what? Shield Toss, I don't play it that much. That would again be my next one after the helmet. So, yeah, Shield Toss will go ahead and lock in as Captain America's least good card.
All right. Well, it's your choice now, Villain Theory. I'm excited to hear which hero you go with next.
So, I will choose. Let's have a little think here. I think a really interesting one to talk about would be Black Widow. Black Widow has a lot of really, really fascinating cards with interesting uses, and I found choosing for her really, really difficult. I got it down to 2, but I don't feel good about it.
Before you
And
announce your choice, let me just say this was the one I struggled with the most, so I understand it. I had the hardest time picking here.
I think people might be unhappy with me when I make this choice, and I feel like you might disagree. But for me, I'm going to choose Simp Suit, and yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to get comments about this one.
I think no matter what you choose for Black Widow, you're going to get comments because I did not choose Synsuit. So I'm excited to hear you tell me why you think Synsuit's the worst. I chose Dance of Death.
Ooh, that was a contender.
And I think it's important to tell people who are watching this, we did not discuss these ahead of time. So I do not know what your cards are, and you do not know what my cards are. So we're going blind to some degree. So tell us, why is it Synsuit for you?
So Simp Suit is a 3-cost upgrade which gets Black Widow +1 defense, and it has a response when you trigger the ability of a preparation card, which you're doing a lot. You get to ready Black Widow, and on paper, this is a really good card, and I know some people really like this. I know people used to play like heroic mode with builds around this card, and that makes me fearful of the comments. But my problem for this card is with Black Widow, my playstyle at least, and I think most people's, is to go Alter Ego a lot, if not every turn. And some people even want to stay there. Not me personally, but she's going Alter Ego a lot. If I'm Alter Ego, let's say every other turn or almost, then I'm only getting used out of Simp Suit every other turn, which is a lot of cost to invest. It's a free cost upgrade, and then not get to use it every single turn. But the other thing is, I can defend with her, but if I'm against a heavy, hitter, maybe I don't want to be, free defense is fine, but if Magneto or Ronan or Venom or someone is hitting me, I might prefer to throw an ally in the way. And, Venom has some overkill, but, the general gist is I might prefer a status card or an ally over actually defending in the first place, although I do like the readying from this. So, I'm already getting into there's some upside here, but it just doesn't really fit with my game plan ever with Black Widow. And I think building, defensively around her, you've got to get Simp Suit, then you've got to get, your other defense things, and she's already quite a slow-paced character. So I think kind of this more defensive, slow-paced character, then having to do something else kind of slow-paced that might not trigger all the time, is just what rates it down for me.
Interesting. I think this was a contender for me, so I can definitely see it. I think Synsuit is pretty expensive, and it kind of directs you into a play style that is more defensive. So when I'm playing a protection build Black Widow, this is great. But you did also mention, 3 defense in the modern game is not what it was in Wave 1.
Yep.
So if you're playing defensive and protection, you probably have Armored Vest, which means you're getting 4 effectively. And then if it triggers a ready, I could see it being valuable. For sure against minions, you can trigger against a lot of minions and ready yourself. And if you're essentially defending anyway, you're probably going to trigger a preparation because you have so many. And it's almost like a free ready. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like Quicksilver. You might as well just exhaust to defend because you're probably going to ready. But it is limited, and the cost is the biggest downside, I think, for me. But yeah, I think this is a contender for me. So I
Okay.
don't think you're crazy for choosing this.
I feel a lot better after hearing that, trust me.
I was worried that my choice was going to ruffle a lot of feathers. But as I looked at her signature cards, Dance of Death, I think is the one I landed on. It is expensive. It's a 3-cost event. A lot of heroes have a 3-cost damage event, and that's okay. But this one, it just 1 damage, 2 damage, and 3 damage. So it's 3 for 6 damage. That's not great. 4 effective resources for 6 damage is a bad return. It is somewhat boosted because you have 3 different attacks. But correct me if I'm wrong, but because it's 3 different attacks, you can't use certain cards to boost those attacks, like Warrior Skill.
Yes, correct. You can use aggressive energy because that boosts the whole event, but Warrior Skill says 1 attack. So since you're making 3 attacks, yeah, it's a little bit tricky on that front.
So it doesn't work. It is just an action, and it's not an attack. So I guess, does it get around stun?
It makes 3 attacks. So I think the first one will be blocked, right? But then the other 2 would go through.
Okay, so maybe it's a good way to get around stun. I just find I do not play this card very often. When I'm in Black Widow, there are much better ways of doing damage in basically every aspect at this point. And yeah, I think her preparations are so good. That's really what you want to build around. Dance of Death is one I often don't play because it's so expensive and it's kind of limited.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think the cost to damage ratio, if Black Widow was re-released today, she would have a lot more damage on it or some extra effect or lower cost. It'd be something on those lines. It doesn't feel too good. And in a lot of situations, you might just want to finish off the villain, or even modern minions will have, 5, 6 health. So you're basically sinking all of Dance of Death into one target anyway, which can reduce the value there. But the flexibility is nice. But no, I agree with everything you're saying. It doesn't also really synergize with anything else she does in her kit, whereas everything else basically does. So yeah, Dance of Death was probably the next contender for me. So no, you're not crazy on this one at all. My thought process about these 2 cards is I do quite often want to do damage with Black Widow, especially if it's solo or two player, or we're trying to like take down the villain now. I'm often quite happy to see Dance of Death to try and get that damage out there. And if I've not been able to, I think Black Widow's strength is to prevent bad things happening. But once the bad thing has happened, she's not very good at dealing with it. I think that's her biggest downside. And Dance of Death is one way she can start to deal with stuff. So that is what tipped it to being maybe her, second least good card, whereas I would rate Swimsuit lower for me personally. But I could be persuaded. I don't have strong feelings either way here.
I think for me, it was pretty close between these two, and I opted for Dance of Death because it doesn't synergize with the rest of her kit, but Synthsuit does. Synthsuit interacts with what she kind of wants to do naturally, which is defend and to be a reactive hero, to play these preparations out to react to things that are happening, and Synthsuit helps multiply that effect and allows you to defend more often. Whereas Dance of Death is just an attack card that is below the curve, and I don't know. I agree with you're saying that there are times when you want to deal damage and finish the villain off, but it's often not enough because it's kind of low
Yeah.
output.
Yeah, it's really difficult for me. I definitely play Dance of Death, sometimes multiple times a game, whereas these days I don't play Swimsuit some games whatsoever. That's my kind of thought process here. So
It
I'm
sounds like a
gonna
toss up. And
hmm,
last time you gave me the toss up. I'm going to defer to you and I'll let you make the final choice here.
I am
I
gonna
don't I don't feel strongly either way.
I am gonna stick with Simpsu. I'm gonna stick with it, which I think I'm definitely interested for the comments on this one. But I just think I'm not defending every turn, because I'm not sometimes not hero form with her. And if you don't go here, if you don't go Ultra Ego, you miss out on obviously the bigger Ultra Ego hand size, but the card draw from playing a preparation or Ultra Ego, the card draw on the next turn from playing a preparation card or Ultra Ego, you miss out on using your safe house twice. You basically miss out on like 5 cards or something, like a whole hero hand size, which does, I think, force me to use this less. So I've talked myself 100% into it. I'm going to say,
Okay.
unfortunately, Simsuit.
There's some there's some tough choices here and there's some really fun heroes to talk about. But I think I would like to talk about Thor next.
For interesting. The Asgardian.
The Asgardian himself, the original Asgardian. Well, I think Thor's wasn't as hard for me as some of the other ones. The card that I think is his worst is for Asgard.
Yeah, interesting. So his one cost event here. I'm going to make it easy on you. I also think it's for Asgard.
Okay, well, then I'll give a few points why I think it is, and if you want to add to it, you can. I think it is an alter ego action, which right away makes it less appealing for me. We talked about in the last episode, alter ego events are hard to time, they're just tricky to make work. It only searches out Asgard traded cards, which can be important, especially early in the game because he needs to have things. But once those are largely in play, it becomes a very limited card. There are not a ton of Asgard traded cards in the broader card pool.
Yeah.
So you're mostly searching for his signature cards. And once those are in play, you're not really doing much with this. It's not even a lightning resource, which would synergize with one of his attack events. So you can't use it for that either. I think overall this is pretty limited and yeah, I'll leave it there and let you say some things.
Yeah, this card, in my opinion, definitely should have been 0 cost, and it's unfortunate that it kind of runs out of uses. If there was something repeatable, maybe an event with the Asgard trait, or I mean, I guess it's a signature ally, but you know, it's it's tricky. So for Asgard, for me, it's kind of a bit like ancestral knowledge in the previous episode we talked about. If Asgard is 3 cost, and I've had to use 4 Asgard to find it, it's effectively kind of almost like a 5 cost card. God of Thunder suddenly kind of becomes, almost like a 3 or 4 cost card. And I could just play Avengers Mansion and it doesn't increase my hand size, but if I keep drawing a card with it, it will do the same thing. So I find and like I say, Quinn carrying, compared to God of Thunder. So my motivation to use for Asgard to find an Asgard card, the cost of for Asgard does not equal the cost of the benefits that Asgardian cards have compared to an average card. I rambled a bit there, but long story short, the Asgard cards are not good enough to cost me, make me have to pay that 1 cost and go Ultra Ego for.
Yeah, it should have been put one into play. So I think for me, this card's a miss. There's not enough Asgard cards in the card pool. None of his events have Asgard traits. So this is a miss for me.
Yeah. And I also want to say that the Bifrost is a thing now in the current card pool. So if I am trying to get an ally, out of my deck, that's just a much, much better way to do it. In fact, it's like paying the cost for Asgard, but getting to use it, on multiple turns in a row without having to pay anything extra. So yeah. I think we're agreed on
Yeah,
this one. It's
I think with
not
this
his
we
best.
agreed. This is his weakest card in my opinion. So that was a pretty easy one. So you got next choice.
Let's go for Doctor Strange. We have to get the powerhouse out of
Ooh.
the way. Now, this is a weirdly tough one for me because obviously a lot of his cards are very good, but they're mostly the invocation deck. Once you look outside the invocation deck, there are a lot of cards you might just never play at all because you're just spamming that invocation deck. Generally, the way he is most commonly played, most powerfully played, I would say. And it's almost a shame because some of these are kind of interesting. I do like the different uses here, but a card I very, very rarely play, most rarely play, is going to be magical enhancements.
I was wondering if you were going to pick an invocation card here, and you
Oh.
didn't, which was not a surprise. I also chose magical enhancements. So why don't you tell us why this is what you think his worst card is?
Well, let's start in solo play. In solo play, if
Mm.
I'm exhausting, I'm playing an invocation, 90% of the time, more ideally. And this is boosting the, forwarding attack defense kind of stats. And I'm just not really using about those, don't really care about those. I can ready up with the cape, but I want to use that again for invocations typically. So this card just doesn't see a lot of play, although I will say I kind of like this art on it now I'm looking at it here more closely. Uh, in multiplayer games, if there is a hero with lots of readying, this card isn't bad at all. You can get some value out of it, but it just doesn't really work with Doctor Strange's kit the way he's ever really played, in my opinion. So, if this card was just a blank card in his kit, most of the time I wouldn't even notice.
Yeah, I mean, you said 90% of the time you're exhausting to use an invocation. I will say 90% of the time I'm not playing this on myself if I'm Doctor Strange. And I think that's probably how it was meant to be played. But his basic stats are very similar to Miss Marvel's basic stats, in that I don't know what they are and I don't care because I'm not using the basic stats. So, he might as well have zero thwart, zero attack, zero defense because I'm never using them. This
Yeah.
is just, it's also only for one round, which really makes it hard to use. If there was a way for it to stick around somehow, if it stuck around until you actually used those abilities, then maybe I'd play it to thin my deck. But yeah, I think it's pretty easily the weakest card in my opinion. All right. Well, it's my pick next, and there are only two heroes. If you remember last time, I had the choice when there was only two left, and I left you the big green machine. This time, I'm going to take the big green machine, and I'm going to leave you with Miss Marvel. So I'll take Hulk,
Okay.
throwing a little bit of a curveball here. I will fall on the sword and take one for the team and talk about Hulk.
Good luck.
Now, talk about hard choices. Some of these heroes, it's hard to choose a worst one, and some of them, it's hard to choose a worst one because there are so many. You could talk all day, and people have, about these cards. For me, I think his worst one ended up being pretty easy after I really started looking through them. It's Hulk Smash.
No, it's not.
Well, then which one is it, Villain Theory? What's your pick?
Oh, you were going for Hulk Smash?
I'm going for Hulk Smash. Yep. And I'll tell you
Oh.
why.
Oh, I'm intrigued. I'm gonna go for suborbital leap. And
Okay.
I would talk about it, but you got to tell me Hulk Smash. What?
Okay. So I think suborbital leap is the one a lot of people are going to go to, and the comments might get blown up for this.
This is
Hulk
why Sim
Smash,
suit.
Hulk Smash, in my opinion, is hard to pull off. So before I talk about anything else card, let's just talk about this card. This is an interrupt, and when you make a basic attack, you get plus 10, and you get overkill if you only pay fist resources. Now, the fact that it's linked to a basic attack is bad. You can't do both. So oftentimes, all Hulk can do is probably play one card and do a basic attack, but you can't do both if you play this, as is essentially just you're attacking one time. If you get exhausted for whatever reason, if you have to defend for whatever reason, this is a dead card. This card can't be used. So if something happens where you get exhausted or you're getting low on health and you just have to defend, this is not useful. It's your entire turn to play one card, and plus 10 damage is good, and you might be able to hit that overkill kicker a lot. But I have found that, especially in a solo game, if we're talking, I know you'll talk about the solo perspective a lot, but oftentimes there is other things he needs to do, like thwarting. And by the numbers, I think other cards are worse. But I think the fact that it's cost 3, it makes it bad. It's analogous to Cyclops's big attack card. I forget the name of it, but it's
Full
1
blast.
cost, right? Yeah, full blast, and he gets all that extra damage. And this is just, I think it pales in comparison. So I went for something wild card here, but why don't you go?
That's interesting. I'm going to spoil a future episode and hope nobody remembers. If I was choosing for Cyclops, it's probably going to be his full blast card because I think it's quite overrated. So here's me talking about Cyclops, but you
Yep.
have to also pay for his Optic Blast, which is his hero ability, which is a 1 cost, and you have to have an upgrade on the enemy, which is kind of conditional, and also another card from your hand kind of going. So really, it kind of is a free cost card when you think about it. There has to be kind of free cards or resources involved. So interesting. To me, Hulk Smash is kind of his best card. And
Hmm.
I agree with what you're saying because if you're exhausted, it's awful. I would say if I'm forced to defend with Hulk, the game is probably lost for me at that point, unless it's a protection deck that's leaning into it. But for the most part, for me, I'm building around. This is my win condition, so I really like this card. I think 10 damage for free cost is really good. Yes, it's a little bit conditional on attacking, basic attacking, but I like it. I really like it. And what I think is nice about this card is even if you don't get the physical kicker and don't get overkill, this is still playable, which is in sharp contrast to some of his other cards, such as Crushing Blow. So I do like that about it.
All right. Well, what's your pick then? Let me hear your argument.
So Suborbital Leap is a free cost card, which might just remove free threat. So free cost for free threat. This is basically in line with what I actually picked for She-Hulk in the previous episode, in terms of her forwarding card, which is very, very inefficient. Now, if I paid with any physical resources, I might get 5 threat removed, but just spending your whole turn removing 5 threat is, in my opinion, extremely inefficient. So, okay, you could basic attack for free as well, possibly, or defend for free, but Hulk is in desperate need of thwarting, and they just tremendously overpriced this card. If you cannot hit the physical kicker, this is just absolutely terrible. And that is basically my whole argument. It's just very, very expensive, doesn't do very much. And if we ever factor, fun kind of into these discussions, it's very plain. It's like, do this very plain thing, or pay with the right resources and do this very plain thing slightly better.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be the minority for the card I chose. And I maybe tried to pick something a little wacky because I think it's not going to take much convincing. Suborbital Leap is a terrible card.
Yep.
And I suspected you were going to go there. So I went for something slightly different. I think
Okay.
Suborbital Leap is bad. It is just straight up bad. There is very little redeeming about it. The art is cool and the name of it is cool.
Yeah.
And other than that, that's all I can say that's nice about it.
It has a super
It's
penetrate.
it's 3 for 3. I mean, if you can afford Def Focus, Hulk can't afford anything. But yeah, I think this is it's not going to take much for me to be convinced that this should go on the list.
So the last choice is mine, but is it really a choice if there's only one character left? So we have Miss Marvel here, and Miss Marvel is one of my favorite heroes in the game, and I found picking her worst card really, really tricky. So I'm curious what you've come up with, Boomguy. What do you think Miss Marvel's worst card is?
I think her worst card is pretty obvious. I chose Big Hands.
Okay, Big Hands is an interesting one. It came across my radar, but for me, I'm gonna pivot to Red Dagger.
Well, if anybody listens to my podcast, you can find us on wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. We actually had an episode about this card not very long ago where I was very negative about this card. So I'm interested to hear, but the comments we got and the messages I got were very positive about Red Dagger. So I'm curious to see what the comments have to say to you now that you've picked Red Dagger. So why don't you tell us, why is it Red Dagger?
Well, here's the problem. I actually really like Red Dagger, and I might have been in your comments about him. But I'll tell you what the reason I didn't go for Big Hands is because I think it synergizes what Miss Marvel wants to do. She is an event-driven hero, and it is an event, and it is a very reliable event. Red Dagger, on the other hand, is an ally, and allies are good. She will probably still play a few allies, everyone does, but there's no synergy really, and at free cost, it's not really expensive, but if you're trying to hit Shrink and Embiggen for maybe maximum efficiency kind of thing, then can you afford a free cost ally as well? Most of the time, I'm playing, two cost allies on her if I'm really, really honest, more than most heroes. So it's difficult because I can say more good things about Red Dagger than bad things. So I am really interested. It sounds like maybe we've even switched opinion, whereas, I'm now having to be negative about him and don't want to, whereas you were negative in your podcast and now you picked a different card.
I was very negative on Red Dagger. I do not like Red Dagger. I think Red Dagger is a bad card. But I was convinced to some degree by the co-host of the podcast who argued that Red Dagger is good and has a use for all the resources that she can accumulate sometimes in Alter Ego with all of her upgrades and supports, and then has nothing to do with them. So playing him can make sense.
Yeah.
I think Big Hands is bad. Big Hands is 3 effective resources for 4 damage. That's a bad return. Yes, that comes with a slight asterisk because her whole thing is boosting it. However, that's another card that requires to be played and used in order to hit this. And often you want to use that kicker for a better card and not for big hands. So it relies on interacting with Embiggen to make this even remotely playable because as it is, this is a bad card. And to have a low attack card stuck in a hero's kit isn't great.
It's interesting because I think both Big Hands and Sneak By are basically taxed because she has those, Shrink and Embiggen, which, if you guys don't know, boost either, the forwarding or damage of a card by 2. So I think they kind of have said, they don't want to make these cards too good baseline because people will be boosting these up. And, I feel similar with Storm's pack, the Precon. I feel like a lot of the X-Men allies in that pack are weaker because Uncanny X-Men boost them up. So it's kind of interesting. I would be interested to, ask the designers that and if there's any merit to that. But at the same time, I play Big Hands a lot when I play Miss Marvel, especially if I'm not playing aggression or if I'm not playing solo justice, where I'm probably going to, spam the heck out of Turn the Tide, let's face it. Big Hands to me is something, if I'm in like a multiplayer game, we need to take out the villain now. I can suddenly pivot from, forwarding a lot. I can play Big Hands, bounce it back, play Big Hands. At least having 3 copies is giving me reliable damage. Whereas Red Dagger, if I've got better allies, I'm just never playing Red Dagger, is kind of the thing. And you could make the argument that if I've got better events, I'm not playing Big Hands. But I would say every aspect has access to really good allies. Not every aspect has access to, really good events, attacks. So that's kind of my thinking here.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the tax is interesting that you brought that up. I think that is also prevalent in one of your favorite heroes. I think Star Lord has that issue. I think a lot of his cards cost 3 because of that ability, and if he didn't have that ability, they should be costed less. I mean, Red Dagger, I can say plenty bad about Red Dagger. I think he's too expensive. I think the ability that he gives you is too much money. Like, I just don't like him, and I will rarely ever play him. Big Hands, I think, is only playable with Embiggen. And if you've used Embiggen on any other card this turn, I mean, if you have nothing else to do, yeah, but I think that logic goes with every card. Like, if you have nothing else to do, then you'll play whatever card you can. I just don't think this is good. And I think Sneak By and Big Hands are both kind of and they rely on Embiggen. Yeah, I think it wouldn't take much to convince me that Red Dagger is her worst card because I don't like Red Dagger either. But I think Big Hands, it should have a higher output.
Yeah. This one I'm also really on, like, kind of between the two because I'm generally on any character happy to play a 3 cost ally with 2 forwarding and 2 attack. That ability box could be blank, and it might not be my ideal 3 cost ally, but it's very, very playable. It reminds me of, say, Colossus's signature ally Shadowcat. Reminds me of the Deadpool ally we have now, that kind of thing. So, though you can get other benefits, quite often you might just get, the plain stats, and it's absolutely fine. Whereas Big Hands definitely does, it should hit harder for its cost. So, in a way, I do think Big Hands is a worse card. But for Miss Marvel, I feel like Red Dagger is worse. That's my kind of stance on that. So I don't feel too strongly. I think if you feel like big hands, I'm happy to go with that.
I mean, one of the things I like to ask myself with a lot of these cards is if Big Hands was an aspect card, would it be gathering dust or would you be playing it? Same with Red Dagger, right? I think if Red Dagger was a basic, a gray ally, I would find uses for him. I think if Big Hands was just a 2 cost for 4 in the aggression aspect, I I mean you wouldn't play this. Like, you would never play that card.
Mm. I'll be honest, outside of maybe like aggression protection, I wouldn't play Sneak by as an aspect card, but I wouldn't play
No.
Big Hands. I wouldn't, Red Dagger. I mean, uh, I will reluctantly relent to Big Hands. I think we can go with that one.
Okay, we can go with Big Hands. I didn't feel super strong about either way it could have gone, but I think Big Hands just if that was 2 for 4 in aggression, I would just never play it.
Yeah, cool. So
All right, so we're ready to pivot now to the next part, right?
yeah, the ranking bit where it gets really spicy.
I love this.
So this is the second part of the video where we are going to try and rank these, quote unquote worst cards, least good cards from each hero in our opinions, up against the other quote unquote worst cards from the other waves. So far we've only done the core set, that was the last video, and I'm a little bit scared about how this is going to go. I think this is going to be very difficult, but we are going to try and do this with a positive spin, talking about, why we would use these cards when we would use these cards.
Yeah, so it's important to remember we are being positive and we are trying to rank them in terms of like their strength. So, the first half we kind of said some negative things and picked the worst card, but the top of the list here isn't the worst ones, it's the best ones.
Yeah, I think I'm going to open it up, and I think I'm going to go for Miss Marvel's card. We just talked about her. It was pretty interesting. It's pretty fresh on my mind. And I think even if it had been Red Dagger, but it's, Big Hands, I think both of those, in either case, what I want to do is put this basically at the top of B tier. I use this card, and I would play Red Dagger sometimes, but Big Hands is just to me playable. There are times where, you said you wouldn't play this card, unless, had no other choice. Sometimes this is the only way I have to deal with a minion out on the board. As an event-driven character, Miss Marvel's a little bit unreliable. She has to use what she has. Big Hands is something I use, and I don't feel terrible about it. I don't feel great if I don't have him big enough, but I don't feel terrible. So for me, I kind of like Big Hands.
I think it is a reliable way to attack, right? If you're
Yeah.
building her out of aggression, you may not have a ton of attack cards, and it's a reliable way to hit that. The same way that sneak by is if you're playing a non-justice aspect, it's an easy way to get some port. So it's nice that she has that in her kit. I think the art is really great in this card, so I will say that. I think it's superpower traded, right? So
Yes.
you can hit it with Def Focus if you want to. And it's an event, so you can bounce it and play it multiple times. I think there's a lot of good things to say about this card, and I do not disagree at all with your ranking. I think above Webbed Up is appropriate.
Yeah. I could even see it moving up, or at least being on a different tier to Webbed Up at some point, but I'm not sure on that because, like you said, if it was an aspect card, I probably wouldn't deck build with it. But
I'm
yeah,
not prepared to put it a full tier higher at this point, but that may change as we get more cards. I think
yeah,
for right now, that's where it should be.
yeah. No, I agree. I agree on that. Where do you want to go next?
Oh, I really want to go to Synth Suit next because I
Oh
think
no.
a lot of your viewers are going to be upset with how you ranked this. I actually Now, if it was up to me, I would put it. It's not an S tier card. I think this might be our first A tier for me. I might put it in the A tier because I think this card is very playable. I play this with Black Widow pretty much every time I play her. I always put this out. I can't think of a time I wouldn't. I would put it above Big Hands, and I might put it in that next tier up. What do you think? You disagree with that?
It's interesting because I play Big Hands more than I play Suit, and even
Mm,
taking away the copies, there are just games I don't play Suit, but at the same time,
mm.
you can do some really good stuff with it. I am. I'm going to tentatively agree. I think it does deserve to be in at least B tier. Let's put it in A tier. Let's go for it. I'm fine with that. I
Okay.
yeah, it has builds you can do that work more around it. I think that's a big merit to it. And readying up and getting a defense boost, it's interesting to compare Suit to Storm's Cape, which can also ready her when she does her unique thing and also gives her a defense boost. But Storm's Cape definitely won't ever make this video, this series. I can tell you guys that. But Suit has ended up here. It's just the nature of Black Widow to want to go alter ego, and that I don't think she loves to. Defense stat is fine, but if I'm always going alter ego, I can just recover for free. This is defend for free. The readying is kind of the big benefit I see here.
And I think we disagreed on this card, right? We picked different ones for Black Widow. I think
Yeah.
if we had gone with my pick, I would have placed it quite a bit lower. I actually think Sinsu's pretty good, but I agreed with you that it was kind of a toss up for her worst card. I think she has a lot of really good cards, and that was a tough choice. So I think this is a pretty strong card.
It's difficult because I think I would have put Dance to Death in A tier as well. I'm happy with the swimsuit pick. Let me know in the comments again. Uh, but yeah, it's
RIP
tricky,
your
but yeah,
comments.
yeah, that's okay. What could go wrong?
As Star Lord always says.
That's the one.
All right, where you want to go next?
I feel like we've got our first A tier card on, the least good kind of tier list here. I feel like we might need to move down to the other end of and I don't know if it'll be the worst card on here, but I need to go for Hulk's suborbital leap. And yeah, this is a tricky one for me. It's definitely D tier. How D tier is it? I would say I like this more than Ground Stomp because I need the forwarding, and 5 forwarding for 3 cost is kind of better than, 1 damage for 2 cost, put it that way. I think this is where I end up with suborbital leap, but what do you think?
I think that's exactly where I end up with it too. I think it is better than Ground Stomp purely because it gives Hulk something that he doesn't already have. I think Ground Stomp just gives She Hulk more of what she already has. So I would put it above, but still not good. But if we had to say nice things about it, it does give him thwart, right? And if you hit the kicker, which isn't impossible because he has a lot of physical resources, you're then hitting for 5 thwart, which is very, very valuable to him because he literally can't thwart in any other
Yeah.
way. So I would say it is there. And just because of the flexibility of allies, War Machine outperforms it, but I would almost put it above War Machine. But just because it's an ally, I won't.
Okay, I'm glad we're happy with this. We've been quite on agreement so far here. I feel like this
Yeah.
is going to change with the next 3.
Ooh, I am going to pick for Asgard next. And I'm going to put for Asgard right near the other alter ego event. I'm going to put it at the bottom of C tier for me. It's below Crisis Interdiction. I think
Okay.
we have 2 alter ego events there. I think one of them is better than the other clearly, and that is Black Panther's event. I played this less in Crisis Interdiction. I considered putting it on D tier, and if you felt strongly about it, I wouldn't disagree. I think it's going to end up at the bottom of C tier, like for a while. I don't think anything is in the C tier is going to be worse than for Asgard. But
I
we are saying nice things about it, right?
Yeah.
So I should focus on the good stuff. So let me say it does allow Thor to tutor the cards that he needs, right? He can go find things that he needs. And in his alter ego form, where he has to play this, he has 6 hand size rather than the 4 he has starts with on his hero hand side. So he can play some of them. If anything forces you to discard those cards for whatever reason, caught off guard or anything, you can get them back with this, which is important. Lady Sif is quite good, although she's expensive. She does
Yeah.
help him a lot, so that's good to play her. And there are some other cards outside of his hero kit, which we didn't talk about in the first half, which I'll just name drop a few of them here. Some of them are quite good, actually, right?
Yeah.
He has Angela, Beta Ray Bill, Throg, Hall of Heroes, Heimdall, Valkyrie, Jane Foster, the Bifrost, which you mentioned, and Yarn Bjorn. So all those are pretty solid cards. Gives you more access to those,
Yeah.
but I still think it's limited.
I was going to disagree and put this down on D tier, but if I get for Asgard turn 1, I will sometimes play it just to find something useful to set up where, an extra. If I don't find any other resource generators, perhaps I will use it to grab, one of something that can give him bigger hand size or generate a resource. So I will use it. I'm torn about this and War Machine, but I think, yeah, I'll agree with you. I'll put it here at the end of C tier.
I
And
could put it at the top of D tier too. It's right on the edge for me. But for me, what takes it over the top is the other cards outside of his hero kit that it also can help you find. Throg is great, which you can
yeah,
throw out. He has plenty of minions, and you can pay for it probably, right? So that's a good one. Heimdall, maybe not so much, but Hall of Heroes, another fun upgrade or support that he can play. Yarnbjorn. So I
setting up
think it's
Bifrost,
helpful.
yeah.
Yeah, Bifrost too.
Mm. Yeah. I almost feel like with Swimsuit, I was almost defensive and didn't say enough good about it. Readying is good, especially for that prep card. I just want to go back to that. Readying is really good. There's a lot good about that card. And again, just having a card that can find all these different cards, like for Asgard, that is quite powerful in a card game where card games are, notorious. And, it's also the fun thing about them. They are random. They're unpredictable. Every hand you get kind of is a different kind of puzzle. And for Asgard, just gives you that bit of control. So I do like it. And I think I'm happy to lock it in here.
All right. Well, what's your next card that you want to say nice things about?
Probably in the next video. No, no, no. Well, I really like Shield Toss, and I'm thinking this might be our second A tier card. I feel like you might disagree with this. And I'll admit, in solo play, it's rarely that efficient. Although sometimes I do like finding damage. Even if it's just to end the game, I can play this. And if I'm ending the game, I don't mind that my shield isn't equipped anymore. That kind of thing. In multiplayer, if there's just a few targets for it, or multi-villain scenarios, for example, this card can be quite efficient. So I do like Shield Toss, and I'm going to tentatively drop it here, and I want to hear what you have to say about that.
Oh, this is one we might disagree on. I would have put Shield Toss below Webbed Up. I think Shield Toss is not great, and there's a lot of limiting factors for me that just doesn't do a ton. It is meant to clear the table, I think, but in the modern game, most minions, or a lot of the really worst ones, are above 4 hit points, so it doesn't clear things out. And putting your shield in your hand is dangerous, unlike Thor, who can put Mjolnir back in his hand for one of his big attack cards. He can get it back if he loses it for whatever reason. If Cap loses that shield, it turns off shield block, which is the second best defense event in the game, and then you're really in trouble. I just find it very situational, as a lot of things have to line up. And so for me, I think I play it less than Webbed Up and Big Hands even. It's the first one we disagree on, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting about how good it is as a defense card. I feel like maybe Shadowcat's defense card has entered the mix here as well. It's interesting. There's a couple of others too, but it is an extraordinarily good defense card. And I will say I don't ever play Shield Toss unless I can really replay my shield usually. But there are
Has
times
plenty of resources.
there are times where it doesn't matter as much. It's interesting.
True.
I could see moving it down a tier, but to me, this is better than Webbed Up personally. I do use this card sometimes. I think if this was an aspect card and it was like return a 1-cost upgrade to your hand to, you know, yeah, it's difficult. I could maybe argue to put Shield Toss down onto B tier, but I feel like I like this a lot more than Big Hands and Webbed Up. Definitely more than Webbed Up. It's just, if this was an aspect card and it said return a 1-cost upgrade to your hand and, spend as many cards you like to put this full damage out, there are games and decks I'd put this in. If I can compare it to like maybe Melee as an aggression card, if this was an aggression card, in big 4-player games, especially minion-heavy scenarios, I'd be happy to use this. If the minion only has 3 health, no big deal. I don't mind about missing 1 on one of them. If it has 5 or 6 health, I can probably find another way to finish it off. Whether that's replaying my shield with a Retaliate, or his attack for 2, and then I can ready up by discarding a card with Captain America's ability. So I'm gonna put it here, and if you want to put it down further, I don't mind. But I need to be strongly convinced to put it beneath Webbed Up.
I think you've convinced me to some degree. I think the same logic that I used for Big Hands, if we applied that to Shield Toss, I think you would probably end up with it higher. It is good. I think I'm a little bit spoiled because Captain America has so many good cards that this one ends up feeling worse just in comparison. But if I was to make this an aspect card, I think you would just play it more. So I think I would be comfortable leaving it under Synth Suit in the A tier if you felt strongly. I could be convinced of that.
I was about to ask you, how do you feel about me moving it back up? Excellent.
Yeah. I don't think it's better than Synth Suit. I will stand by. I think Synth Suit is very strong. Being able to ready, plus activating that 3 defense, plus triggering off something she already wants to do is really good. I'm happy with that. I can live with that.
Cool. You know what? Swimsuit does have some interesting builds nowadays, like the Taunt build, which I don't love for Black Widow, but it does add some really interesting utility to Swimsuit. It's a very, very fun way to play Black Widow. I think if I was playing him protection, I do quite like that build. But the Swimsuit's definitely going to be the spicy one here. But
Well,
yeah,
I'm gonna throw a grenade into your comments and also say that I think taunt should cost 0, but that's just my opinion.
yeah, I think I'll agree. There's a lot of fun taunt builds out there, but I don't strictly necessarily think they're all better than the non-taunt builds. I think there's only a couple characters where it really pulls ahead enough. And sure, if it pulls ahead enough to justify its cost on a couple of characters, they can have a card that's really good. So I don't mind them having that. So yeah,
Mm.
I'll chip in and tentatively agree. Uh,
Ooh, okay,
so,
spicy.
yeah, yeah. And
Uh,
that leaves us with one choice. So it's sort of, yeah.
it's not really a choice. I'm stuck with magical enhancements. I'm not positive on this card. I'm gonna put it at the top of the C tier. I think it's not very good. I think it is still better than the alter ego events, but for a character who doesn't really want to be using their basic abilities, it seems like a waste. The only reason it's not a D tier card for me is because you can play it under other players. And so in a
Yeah.
multiplayer game, you can boost people, but it's essentially just playing Moxie. Man, maybe I'm talking myself into putting it lower. Like I could just play Moxie, but I guess it doesn't lock you into an aspect. So I'll leave it at the top of C tier. If you wanted to push it down lower, you would meet with very little resistance on my end.
This one's really difficult because, as a card in general, if this was in almost any other hero's kit ever, it would see more play. Because Doctor Strange just has one thing in mind, which is invocations. So in Doctor Strange, it's rare that I would even in multiplayer, it would have to be a really ready heavy hero, which is fine. But having to build a team, or not just a multiplayer game, having to build a specific team to get this to be really something I would want to use. But in those cases, I would agree. I could see myself playing it. If I couldn't afford a whole invocation that was out, maybe, or I was stuck with vapors and I have a status card somehow. Uh, I don't know. I definitely C tier seems right to me. Maybe the top of D tier. I'm I'm gonna push this one down just by how much it gets played, down to the bottom of C tier for now.
Mm,
You know what? Not.
okay.
I'm gonna push it down to almost the bottom of C tier.
Okay. I think that feels better. It is saved by the fact that you can play it on somebody else.
Yes.
And in a multiplayer game, then it might see use. In a solo game, I think this is a card that you never play unless you're just playing to thin your deck. But he doesn't really benefit from thinning your deck all that much because you just play invocation cards.
Yep.
So I think it's a bad card.
Yeah, it's tough that even the readying heroes I don't think really play morale boost. Some play Moxie, but even then, I wouldn't think a lot of people would argue for it to be one of their best cards they could take. Leadership cards are so strong, but so that's maybe a different argument. But yeah, the +1 to stats here, it's kind of like an adrenaline rush or civic duty that you can't trigger when you want, and those cards are already very niche. So I'm talking myself putting
Oh,
it down further now, but
I
you can play
think
it on it.
the only hero that I would really love this on is like Quicksilver or maybe some of those niche go all out builds, right?
I
But
think, yeah. I mean, I think even X23 SPDR, there's a case for it, but
mhm.
not for Doctor Strange. I'm gonna stick with where it is.
I think it's good right there. I think for Asgard is maybe even more. See, now I'm talking myself into it being worse too.
But you could find
No,
turn
I
one
think
Bifrost.
it's okay there. It's okay there. We'll leave it there.
So, yeah, magical enhancements though. To talk more positively on readying heroes, I think that can be exceptional, and it's cheap. So hey, that's good. And again, I like the art. I actually like the art of for Asgard. I like it's interesting. I like the art for most of the cards we're putting on here.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall I'm pretty positive on the art in the game. That's one of the things we
True.
always discuss when we talk about cards on my podcasts because I think it's something that not enough people touch on. The art overall is really good, and magical enhancements, I mean, is one of the better ones so far. I think that's quite a fun card visually.
Yeah. I like the idea as well that you can magically power somebody up. I hope they explore this kind of concept more. I'd love a support character that can start to boost people up in interesting ways. So a lot of potential there.
I think that's how the designers saw Doctor Strange based on his precon and some of the cards that he has. I think they saw him as that support character,
Yeah.
but they just dialed the power up a little too high and he
Yeah.
just leads.
Yeah. they've kind of made him a support character that can support himself so well. He just wins everything. But it gets even better in
Yeah.
multiplayer still. Like the toughs handed out like candy. But this isn't a Doctor Strange video. This was
No.
his involvement here is magical enhancement, and I'm interested in how we've put these cards out. So we now got 2 cards in the A tier, another one in the B tier. So it does feel like as we've moved into cycle 1, we've rated things slightly higher than we did in the core set. And we still will have cards in C and D tier though, so not a huge amount of difference, but that's probably to be expected as well, as we're not far away from it. I feel like the core set and Wave 1, I feel like they were slightly more generous with the forwarding they gave out in Wave 1, but I feel like the general design principles are almost identical.
Yeah, I think it's not until later in the game that you really start to see things diverging a little bit. I'm not surprised that the 2 A tier cards we have are both from Wave 1 rather than the core set, and one of the 2 B tier, same thing. We still have no S tier cards. I think there are some that are coming
Yeah.
that I can think of. I won't spoil anything, but it's cool to see this list growing. I'm excited to see it after 2 or 3 more waves, how many cards are going to be here, and you really start to get into the fine details of is this card better than this card, and some interesting discussions I think are going to happen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to have a lot of interesting discussions below in the comments. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, let us know what you think in a constructive manner, please.
Yeah, keep it positive. This is meant to be positive. This is the power of positivity. We want to be very positive about this.
Yeah, we're very positive about this. Some cards more than others, but that's to be expected. So, yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out Boomguy's podcast, The Winning Hand. Really, really fun podcast, really professional podcast as well. I want to put that out there. It's really, really good to listen to. So check that out. It's on all good streaming platforms and on YouTube, so you don't have to look far. Links will be around. Links to my stuff will be around. You can hop into Discord and chat with us. And yeah, any likes, comments, whatever, get involved, and that'll be amazing. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thanks for watching and look forward to the next episode.